Speech. Not sure why I did that. What if I speak many languages? Creighton, kom hit, jag måste prata med dig lite. Let's scare the crap out of him. Behöver hjälp? Alltid behöver hjälp. I think at this rate I'm going to get the same amount of stuff done as if I spoke in English. Why is it that I can't speak in a regular voice around children?
You are crazy.
Promote language. Mama. What did you say? Mama. Mama. You should read to your baby every night.
A yacht lay on the sand and Mom stepped into it.
Read a variety of books.
So this one's a little bit different.
I know what you're thinking. This is a sponsorship for IKEA. Just kidding. Should we bring them to IKEA to help with some language? Do people even speak Swedish there? What is the flow of sounds the first year or two of life?
Part of it is sounds and part of it is checking for understanding and responsiveness to the environment. Then they might respond with some sort of vocalization. It might be like an ah or ooh or ah. You move from vocalizations and then some consonant sounds. They typically start on the lip and then it moves through the back of the mouth. So the da, like da da, they're lying on their backs oftentimes, and so their tongue will fall to the back and you'll hear a lot of a goo. And then from there, they start putting these sounds together. Around 4 months or so, they'll start babbling a little and cooing, and then it becomes a little more complex. And so you'll hear the babbling that has more of a conversational intonation. You'll hear more of like a da da da, ba 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 ba, ma 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 ma. And it's a lot of those repeated consonants and those repeated syllables that you'll hear, and then they'll start combining them into something more meaningful. So if it's their mommy, for example, they might say ma ma ma. And at first it sounds like everything might be ma 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 or da da da, and often parents are like, well, why did they say da da before they said mama? And sometimes it's intentional and sometimes it's not. And you'll notice that they'll generalize those sounds. Once they catch on to a sound, they want to practice it. It gets to a point where they recognize, oh, my mommy is mama. So then they will consistently use those sounds for that particular person. When you are in front of your infant or your child and they're saying something to you, you respond to them. You say, oh, I heard you say ah, mama, mama, ma. And then you bring objects in and different people and you give them that repetition and that practice so that you can reinforce to them what you're saying has meaning.
You get really used to responding to your kids' action. And then you kind of follow through with it, but encouraging them to actually like say the word and the word has a meaning is super important.
Right, exactly. And even what you just said of your 15-month-old pointing and saying, ah. I mean, there's a lot going on there. I mean, one, the pointing is a method of communication in and of itself. And so that's something that you really want to look for developmentally as well, because it's a way for them to show that joint attention that, hey, I see something. Do you see it too? I want to show you something.
When they say your kids should be able to say, 10 words, what is a word?
It depends on the age. Under the age of 2, they don't have the tools yet to say things very clearly. We want them just to be able to have some approximation of what that word is. Like dog, for example. They might say da, da. And even though it differs, they're using that pretty consistently. And so they have that sound for that object. You would expect around 2 years that you would understand 50% of what they say. What we want to look at is, are they trying to communicate? Are they understanding? Can they follow simple directions? Are they using sounds that we would expect developmentally? And are they putting these sounds together for things that have meaning to them?
When do you realize that your child actually needs to work with a speech pathologist?
The issue is it's never too early to get checked. And so if you have some concern, then get it looked at, because typically around 5 to 6 years, it gets a little more challenging to close some of those gaps.
What are the biggest issues you see with children when it comes to speech?
Just some pieces in those interactions that could be mitigated by a little bit more verbalizing, a little bit more waiting, a little bit more patience and understanding of where the child is in development. When we see our child upset and crying because they want something, we might just hand it to them. And so if they're crying, they see that parent could say, oh, here's a ball. And you can put it by your mouth and say, it's a ball. Here you go. Here's your ball. And then wait for a response from the child.
Things to avoid to help encourage that development.
Too much of a good thing is never a good thing, right? And so Is screen time a bad thing? Not necessarily. There's some studies that show that educational screen time, some educational shows can really boost vocabulary. It can really help with pretend play. It can give kids who might have some social anxiety a platform to see how kids interact. And so it can give them that practice without having to actually be a part of it. Something also that caregivers can join in on. And so if they're watching a bit of what their child is also seeing, it's a point of conversation. It's a point of interaction. You know, the pacifier, it comes up often. I think that just keeping an eye on how long you're using certain tools, what you're using those certain tools for. Are they something that is productive, or are they literally just pacifying?
When do you introduce a second language?
We live in a country where at least 50% of families have dual language households, if not, trilingual households. If a family wants their family to be bilingual, then do it from the very beginning. The child is learning those languages together. There's some myths about how language develops when they have two or more languages at once, that it's going to really delay language. It's going to interfere with their development of vocabulary and grammar. But the reality is it really shouldn't delay language. There might be a very slight lag, especially if you introduce one language and then later you introduce another. But in terms of meeting those developmental milestones when you are speaking more than one language, if a child is developing speech and language typically, then there shouldn't be an issue. And oftentimes children will move to one language where they prefer at one time, and then they might move to another one and bring them both together. So it's not linear language development where they're gonna learn each at the same pace in the same way.
What are some more strategies to help improve their speech development?
Reading is a great one. Really just narrating what you're doing, talking, and teaching those vocabulary words. If your child has a question, even if they're doing something that they're not supposed to be doing, rather than just saying, no, stop, really explaining to them, hey, this is why we do this. This is another way you can do it, and having them know how to verbally think through the process and really understand it. Sometimes having them learn language during movement can be really helpful. Also getting at their level. Sometimes as parents, I think we say, look at that, what is that, what is that? And they're kind of like, why are you asking me so many questions? I don't even know what you're talking about. So really just kind of getting on their level and saying, okay, if I were my child, and if this is what they're looking at their eye level, what would they see? Not imposing our questions constantly on them, but labeling for them and modeling what it is that they're experiencing and seeing.
Any tricks to encourage babbling?
You want to use whatever modalities you can that's going to be motivating and exciting and interesting for them. And so if a child isn't babbling or you want them to babble more, finding those motivating toys. I do a kind of therapy, it's called prompt therapy. And so it brings in a lot of tactile cueing where you can touch their face. So if you want them to say, ma, 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 or ba, 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 you touch their lips, ma, 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 and you give them that feedback. And then once they say it, you can show them, oh, I saw your lips, or I can feel your lips saying ma, ma, ba, ba. So whatever kind of tactile, visual, audio cueing you can give them is going to help them give that reinforcement to repeat those sounds and to know that this is something that has meaning.
Advice for new parents.
Get close to their face and spend time and look at them and give back to them what they're giving to you. So if they're making a sound to you, if they're smiling, give that back to them so that it's meaningful to them. Hi, I'm Stephanie Frenkel, speech language pathologist. I work in pediatrics with children who have speech and language issues, and that can range from articulation disorders to language learning issues to social emotional issues. Right now I have a private practice. I worked for almost 12 years at a children's hospital and had my second child and decided I needed a little bit more flexibility in my schedule. In non-COVID times, I'd been going into schools and people's homes and having people into my home, working together with families, with caretakers, and with their children to help them with their speech and language issues.